This is the K-State Radio Network. Once again, thanks for joining us for Agriculture Today. Always a topic of interest around agricultural country here in Kansas, the current state of agricultural land values. And the K-State Research and Extension out of the Agricultural Economics Department has just come out with its latest county-by-county land values for cropland and pastures in Kansas based on 2017 data. That was shared at a webinar this week, as a matter of fact. And giving us a quick recap of what those trends are is Mykel Taylor, as you know, agricultural economist with K-State Research and Extension. Mykel, we previewed that webinar here a few weeks back, and now the numbers are out and for consideration. And just speaking broadly here, this is always driven by the economic state of agriculture, and we know where that stands right now.
Yes, unfortunately, 2017 was our fourth year of negative profitability for wheat, corn, beans, and milo, and that is starting to really bear down on the land markets. We keep seeing slow but steady downward pressure on land values across most of the state. There's differences, across the state in terms of the severity of the downtrend. In some parts of the state, they haven't seen much impact at all. It's been pretty much flat. And in other parts, they've seen quite a bit of downward pressure. But it's statewide. It's definitely there. It's definitely just slow and steady correction that's reflecting the profitability in the sector. And
in 17, that continues a trend in the wrong direction, starting, 2014 or so?
Yeah, 2014 was our first year where we had some negative profitability on the crop side, and that led to a decline in net farm income from previous highs of, 130 to 150,000. Well, we dropped down to about 80,000, and then in 2015 we dropped down to about 6,000. And that bounced back up in 2016, but it was primarily driven by some high returns in southeast Kansas, and so it was really across most of the state. We were looking at returns of for net farm income of about 30 to 40,000. That in and of itself has been a problem in terms of just covering farm family living expenses and then having the cash flow to be able to bid on ground. I think that's one of the other issues that we look at here is land markets are built out of long-run expectations, and farmers believe that and that things will turn around. But in the short run, you have to be able to cover cash flow. And so there's a lot of cash that we earned in that 2008 to 2014 period that's going towards making up for deficits right now.
We want to lend numbers to the trends, just how much of a drop-off we've seen this past year. But we need to remind folks, first of all, where you get the values, how you derive the numbers that lead to this report.
Sure. So there's a couple different sources of information. You can get information from U.S. Department of Agriculture, National Agricultural Statistics Service, and NASS data is survey-based. So they talk to farmers, lenders, just a lot of different types of people, try to ask them what they think land values are doing in their area, and we track those data as well. But then we also want to be able to look at actual land sales. And so that data comes from the Property Valuation Department in Topeka through a collaboration with the Kansas Society of Farm Managers and Rural Appraisers. And that's really great data because it's actual sales. We're able to see what's going on in the land market as opposed to a survey.
So you consolidate those two in effect, or
no, we keep them separate. Yep, keep them separate. That way we've got two different estimates we can look at, one survey-based and one market-based.
And you break it down, as one would expect, by non-irrigated, irrigated, and pasture land then?
Yes, we do.
So when you do that, and we will give generalities here, there will be variations around the state and certainly from county to county, but looking at non-irrigated values in 2017, how much did they drop from those of the previous year?
So non-irrigated values dropped about 6.5% from 2016, down from an average of $23.98 for the state to $22.46. And those numbers sound pretty precise, but they are still estimates based on a statistical model that's looking at all of these land sales, putting them into a model, and then trying to kick back out an estimate that's based on the county level, and then I aggregate that up to get a state level number. So down 6.5%. That is pretty much in line with the slow downward trend that we've seen. 2014 was our last year of good prices. We've fallen off since then, and for a total of a 25% decline from the peak in 2014. And USDA numbers have the same downward trend. They're at a little lower level than our numbers are, so we actually show a higher average land value, but the trends are the same.
And irrigated land values, did they fall a similar 6+%, or
no,
were they more stable?
Did not. They were a little more stable. They were actually up 2%. Irrigated land values are a lot tougher to track, so I always say that these estimates, take them with a grain of salt, because irrigated parcels don't sell quite as often as non-irrigated and pasture, and probably the most important driver of irrigated land values is well capacity, and I don't have that information, so I can't control for the quality of the well that's on these different irrigated parcels, and I think that's one of the reasons why I have a tough time really nailing down what that irrigated land value is in different parts of the state.
In pasture, one would guess, likewise, it has taken something of a hit from 16 to 17.
Yeah, it's down about 9% from 2016. Pasture is just basically trying to catch up with where non-irrigated and irrigated were, because 2014, which was the first of the bad years on the crop side, was actually an excellent year on the cow-calf side. And so we were still bidding up pasture up through 2015. So 2015 was the peak year for pasture. So it's still coming down as well.
Now, these numbers that you just shared are statewide averages, but the real detail would be in those county numbers, Mykel, correct?
Yes, and that information we post on Ag Manager so that you can go in and look and see the variation across the state in those county level numbers. And I try to remind people that if you're looking at it as, well, is this what my land is worth? No, this is just a county average for average quality land and for the year, and it's based on the sales that we have. And so if there weren't a lot of sales in your part of the county that reflect your quality of ground, then that number's not going to be very close to your number. So we just want to remind people that we do the best we can with the data we have to work with, but there's still some interesting information in there to look at.
No doubt. So again, dry land crop ground in Kansas down over 6%. Although irrigated held fairly steady, pasture down over 9%. So can you take these numbers and project where we might be headed from here?
Well, as long as commodity prices stay low and our profitability is negative on our main cash crops, then I think that we're going to continue to see this slow, steady downward movement in the land values. It's not going to be until we see a correction in profitability that we stop that decline and we start to recover. But I would say we still have a couple years left of this declining land market. And to be honest with you, we went so high that we could drop 30 to 40% and not be that far off of historic growth rates for where we would have been if we hadn't had such a big spike up in land values. Mm-hmm. So I know these numbers sound huge, but they're not as much to worry about as when you sort of compare them historically where we are.
And you say there are certain X factors, as you call them out there, that will lend to the outlook likewise.
There are. One of them is a drought. If we have a drought in Kansas that causes us to not have good crops and it's not a regional drought or something that affects prices, then we'll have low prices and low yields. And that's the worst possible outcome, that we could have. The other one is a trade war. I'll grant you, some people have asked me, well, if China doesn't buy our soybeans and our sorghum, somebody else will. Yes, but right now we're at some kind of an optimal allocation, of our trading. And if we end up having to sell it to somebody else, it's going to be something less than optimal. So we won't make as much off of that trading as we would have if we could have gone to the highest bidder, which is China.
Instability isn't helpful.
No, it's not. It's
in
really
any respect.
Yeah. It's just a lot of uncertainty right now. Probably, I'm not going to say more or less than we've had over the last 4 years, but the last 4 years have been really stressful on a lot of producers. I think that's one of the other things we're watching is just, the economic factors, the land value factors, all of that is really adding to the stress of trying to farm and ranch in Kansas and just trying to keep our head above water as we go forward. The good years, I think, buoyed a lot of producers through those first couple of years. But the longer that this lasts, the less of that cash on hand that's going to be there to help us get through.
It eats at the equity.
It does eat at the equity.
And that is something to be duly considered. Again, though, this is a good portrayal of what's happening with land values in Kansas. And in closing, Mykel, this is all now on agmanager.info for one to take a look at.
It is, and if anyone has any questions or comments, feel free to email me at mtaylor@ksu.edu, and I will do my best to answer your questions.
Well, a yeoman effort goes into pulling this report together every year, so congratulations to you for accomplishing this one more time, and we appreciate the summary, as always.
Thank you very much, Eric.
She's Mykel Taylor, agricultural economist with K-State Research and Extension, and look for this by this title, the 2017 Kansas County Level Land Values for Cropland and Pasture. The report in full is now available to you at agmanager.info. This is Agriculture Today.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today. We are nearing time to think about soybean planting in Kansas, and the month of May is prime for that. And we're going to get into some K-State research in recent years, which has uncovered useful information on soybean planting dates. By our way, once again, Ignacio Ciampitti. He's a crop production specialist with K-State Research and Extension. You have, along with your colleagues, invested quite a bit of energy in looking into the options for planting soybeans in recent years, have you not, Ignacio?
Yes, Eric. We were able to gather a wealth of knowledge on planting day and maturity group. We still need much more information in terms of what is the optimal timing. We wanted to make sure that we are capturing the maximum yield combination between planting day and maturity group, but also where is the most stable yields when you're looking over time. And I think that for farmers, that's one of the most important points. It's not really to capture in 1 year, you just see jackpot, you get 70, 80 bushels, and next year you get only 20. Our goal is to say, where am I be able to capture something that consistently I might get, maybe a 50 bushel yield. We were investing in the last 3 or 4 years, specifically looking at different locations and looking at combinations of different planting dates and different maturity groups. With, again, the goal of trying to see how we can get more to the optimal point for soybeans.
And the stability as soybeans push further west in the state. You're trying to establish some baselines there.
Exactly. In many situations, we don't have any information at this point of stability of those soybean yields in those more dryland scenarios. One of the things that we know for sure, if you look at the historical data on soybeans, we need to go back to at the state level. All the historical data on soybeans, it shows that in the last 40 years, soybean planting date, 50% planting date, has been achieved usually consistently earlier in the last basically 5 years as compared to, for example, 1980, 1985.
And it's been moving up on the calendar.
And it's moving up on the calendar, and then in many situations, that is somewhat connected to the best acres, okay? And that's important to emphasize this to farmers, that when we are looking to the best acres and the most productive acres, when we are looking at very high-yielding soybeans, I will say more than 60 bushels, 70 bushels, and above, those are the situations that planting date could play a big role. Planting early might be a big factor. The soybeans, they might be around less than 50 bushels below. I think that then our planting window for soybean is very wide. And I want to emphasize this because previous years we start looking at, okay, I'm already getting too close to May. It's time to plant soybeans at some point. And when you start looking at your window and situations that we were planting even really late, like late June, we still were able to finish the crop, and in many situations, get at least 50, 60 bushel soybeans. So really the planting window for soybeans is quite different as the planting window for corn. And I think that's one of the things that we need to emphasize to our farmers, that we have some level of flexibility to make sure that we target the right soil conditions.
Though one still wants to optimize their soybean planting as close to the ideal date as possible and matching that maturity group. So let's dig into the research that's gone on, since 2014 and annually from then, right?
Exactly. And around 2014, we decided to try to get a few locations. So we have a location in Manhattan, and then Topeka, Ottawa, and then Parsons and Hutchinson. We have been conducting this study since 2014 until the present. And this year we are also planting this in another 3 locations across the state. We have some information, in terms of, different zones on planting time and optimal zones based on the region of the state that you are located. There were basically 4 different zones. We call the zone 1 basically the northwest and a little bit west central, planting optimal soybeans, between May 10 and around first week of June. And then as we are moving east, we were probably moving that window. But in many cases, you see that even going east central, you start seeing that our window is still almost a month, mid-May to mid-June. And if you go to the zone number 4, which is the southeast, you see that in many situations we are between May 10, June 25th. And if you look at the maturity group, you see that we don't see much big separations on maturity group, but we have clearly like a nice trend going from northwest, very short maturities, group 2s, late 2s, mid 2s. And then as we are moving to basically east and central, we have more group 3s. Southeast, we are moving into 4s. And then very in the southeast corner, we tend to have sometimes many group 5s. Our experience, and we will get into the research now, is that in many situations, group 3s or 4s, we don't see, even when we have sometimes a point of separation, we don't see much separation in the total number of days to harvest. So, and that's important to emphasize.
But the reality of it is the longer of window you have to plant, the more latitude you have with the maturity that you would choose. Right?
Exactly. And that's one of the main points to emphasize to our farmers is in many situations we have more than a month in some of the windows.
The end result, though, is what it's all about in regard to yields with the maturity group. They match to that planting date. And do you see large variations there at all, or do they stay in a pretty tight range?
No, and if you go back to the research that we have been conducting in the last 4 years, we tend to see a clear trend in many cases. For example, in a high-yielding environment. In Topeka, for example, under irrigation, consistently we get to see that we can get yields over 60 bushels in many years. But the point is, in those scenarios, moving later than basically mid to late May and moving into June, then is when you start really seeing some yield penalty. In a very high-yielding environments, early planting, early as the soil temperature is ready to plant and soil moisture conditions, it will provide some benefit. If we are going too late, in many situations going like a June 15, we were losing sometimes 5 bushels in 2014. If you go similar situation in 2015, we were always losing bushels anytime that we were moving from a mid-May to early June planting. If you go to many of our other environments, I will call more dryland environments like Manhattan or Ottawa, in many situations, the late planting is when usually we tend to see good results. For example, Ottawa, not much difference between maturity groups, but we are seeing sometimes more consistent yields on first week of June planting. If you go back to 2016, the same. If you go to Ottawa, we have 3 planting dates, June, mid-June, and July. Yes.
Double crop in effect there.
Exactly. And yes, exactly. And we lose, in that situation, you see that many times we are losing 10, 15 bushels going from early June to mid-July. But again, in many situations, our early June planting time for Ottawa was one of the best environments and the dryland situation. In our case, here in Manhattan or more north, we are seeing that this idea of planting around second week of May doesn't show so much difference as compared to go too early. So that's the point, that if you're in a medium yielding situation, going way too early doesn't give you enough benefit, and sometimes, in fact, you might lose plants because you are probably not planting with the right soil temperature, and then so you get penalized in some point more on the number of effective plants. But our first week of May, second week of May for Manhattan was working always excellent. If you go to the last locations on Hutchinson or Parsons, Hutchinson, in that case, we have a lot of variability, and many years I would say first week of June or mid-June was always good. We didn't see much difference or separation between maturity groups. And again, in many situations, we have some flexibility. If you move around a range of half a point, I mean, if your optimal most of the times tend to be a 3.5, if you move around a 3 or a 4, you will always be on target. I mean, we'll be very close. I mean, if you really want to see difference in maturity groups, you might need to see separations of at least a point or more. And that's one of our take-home message from many of these studies. So the planting day maturity group is complex. It depends a lot on regions. Our take in many situations is there is a lot of connection of the planting day decision and the yield environment. High yielding environment, the early planting is a key factor. 50s or below 50s, I mean, that early planting disappear as a factor. And then I have much more for farmers, they might have much more flexibility on the planting window.
And that's what to focus on. Planting date coupled with the yield expectations, as opposed to putting too much energy into maturity group selection.
Yeah, and in fact, I mean, again, and to emphasize this and re-emphasize this, we tend to see a small difference on maturity groups, but at the end of the day, when the maturity groups are being separated only just for half a point, we are not seeing much separation in final number of days to harvest.
There's a terrific article that covers all of this in detail year by year as the studies rolled out from K-State at the multiple locations in the recent Agronomy E-Update newsletter, which was issued this past Friday, April the 20th. Soybean planting dates and maturity groups, the trends, and the K-State recommendations. Ignacio, we'll have you back once again and get into the seeding rates and row spacing questions associated with soybean planting. Until then, thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Eric, for the invitation again.
He is Ignacio Ciampitti, crop production specialist with K-State Research and Extension. We'll return shortly with more on this Agriculture Today. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. Coming your way now on this Agriculture Today, our weekly horticulture segment. And along once more is horticultural entomologist here at the university, Raymond Cloyd. Well, Raymond, the weather appears to be finally turning to the good. More spring-like conditions are checking in, and so there's likely an assortment of insects that are starting to ramp up their activity as well, right?
Absolutely, Eric. I think the first one we can talk about is European pine sawfly. Yep. By the way, these are not caterpillars. That's very important to understand that if you do see a caterpillar-like organism feeding your pines, it's not a caterpillar. So that means you can't use dipel or this bacteria we refer to as Bacillus thuringiensis kurostaki. These are sawflies. They're in the same group as bees and wasps and ants, Hymenoptera. As the weather warms up, we should start seeing the early instars emerging and starting to feed on the pine needles, yes.
And they inflict sometimes serious damage on the pine, do they not?
They can. It really takes a lot of them to set the pines back, depending on the age of the pine. But they definitely make the pines unaesthetically pleasing. I mean, they give them a kind of a rough. The needles are brown and they die out, and so it is really important to deal with them. And one of the easiest ways to deal with them is take a force of water fight and just blast them off the tree, and any birds or anything else will eat them. I think that's probably one of the first things. If you want to use an insecticide, you probably want to contact your extension agent, horticulture extension agent, find out what they would recommend. But force of water sprays will quickly remove all of them. They tend to congregate, and then when you come up to them, they rear their back and the abdomen and their head, and that's their defensive posture. But pretty soon should be time for them to be. You'll see them on your pines feeding away in these very large clusters on the tips of the branches.
They'll be very evident.
Yeah, they are green. They blend in with the needles, but you come up and you'll see these things kind of wiggling all over the place, and you know you're dealing with the European pine sawfly.
So do away with those. And most every pine would be susceptible to this?
Well, we see, in my experience, Eric, that's a good question, the short needle pines. We see mugo and some of the short needle pines. White pine, I have no experience with white pine, but sort of some of the shorter needle pines, and even on spruce, they'll actually feed on those too.
So keep an eye out for European pine sawfly, and they can take the needles out on pines if you let them go too far. Take action accordingly. We want to bring people up to date on the lilac ash borer. We touched upon it briefly last time you were here, but it's now again accelerating in its activity, you say?
Yeah, it's another one of those insects that we would anticipate in April-ish time, springtime. The adults are a clear-wing moth. After mating with the females, they will lay eggs. The females will lay eggs on the bark of a lilac or ash, and then those eggs hatch and the larvae tunnel in. This is a caterpillar borer. So one of our recommendations, if you do have a history of your lilac or ash trees being attacked by a lilac or ash borer, is spray with a pyrethroid like permethrin on the bark, and that will repel them or kill the caterpillars when they hatch from the eggs from tunneling in, and that'll help save your tree. If we get any rain or anything, you may have to reapply, but this would be the time to do. From the base of the tree about 6 feet up, you want to have this barrier, if you have trees those size, to put that barrier to protect your trees from the lilac ash borer.
So you don't have to drench the entire tree or lilac shrub, just about 6 feet up, you say?
Yeah, that's a good point, Eric. Most of the systemic insecticides don't work as well on caterpillar borers as they do beetle borers, because caterpillar borers move in the heartwood and sapwood, move back and forth, where beetle borers are around the cambium phloem area, and that enhances their exposure to the movement of the systemic insecticide. So really, we don't recommend systemics against the caterpillar borers. In this case, the pyrethroids as a barrier treatment should suffice if timed accordingly.
Folks should stay on the alert for these lilac ash borers for a few weeks yet then?
Yeah, and if you want to know their pheromone traps, you can use pheromone traps to detect the males. When you start seeing the males, you should probably be out there with those barrier sprays.
Very good. Well, here's a pest that may not be so much of a threat outdoors, but it's raising questions as it migrates indoors. You call these clover mites. What are these, Raymond?
Yeah, clover mites, we've been getting a number of inquiries. People think they're bird mites. They're very distinctly red-blackish, and they're easy to tell because the front legs are longer than the rest of the legs. They're kind of protrude out. But what they do is they get on turf grass that's right near the foundation, and then they migrate in large numbers inside the house, and people start to panic and wonder what's going on. They're not going to bite anybody. They're plant feeders. They feed on the turf grass. But when they start coming in hordes, these numbers, people get kind of excited about that. First of all, I would keep the turf grass away from the foundation, use a mulch or whatever. You can use yellow sticky boards or traps because they are coming in through openings, or simply vacuum them up, put them outside. But they're not a health issue. They're a nuisance issue, and we've had a number of calls already, images sent indicating that these were clover mites, although they were initially misidentified as maybe bird mites. But the numbers that we're seeing when you see hordes of these in the corners of your house, it's most likely clover mites.
And that's the point. Mites individually are very, very tiny and hard to distinguish, but you're talking about tens of thousands of mites in a mass.
It could be. And if somebody has any questions, just take a yellow sticky card, lay them on the mites, collect them, and send them to our extension office. And again, you can just look for that those two front legs are elongated, sticking out the front. They look like a tarantula mouth. That's how we identify it from all the other mites.
Just vacuum them up and get rid of them? Is that the plan?
That's one of the easiest ways to do it. I wouldn't swish them to leave a red stain, but that's probably one of the easiest ways to deal with them.
Well, Raymond, lastly, we'll pick up on something that was bound to be a subject sooner or later. You're getting questions, you say, as well, about whether it's time to put out an early preventative treatment against bagworms on those landscape conifers.
Yeah, Eric, we've gotten a number of inquiries. I know the horde agents have in some parts of the state. Should I spray for bagworms? And the answer is a definitive no. It's way too early. We're in April. It's June, early June, and that's going to depend on the weather. If we get cooler periods, it's going to set that back. But about May or June is when you should probably be on the lookout or start thinking of these spray applications to ward off any harm from bagworms. Yeah.
Now, again, if you've bagworms left over from last season, you can go ahead and pick those off and try to stem the hatch from this spring that way.
As long as they're female bags. If they're male bags, well, yeah. But if you have bagworms on your trees, if it's a nice weekend this weekend, go out there and pick them off. Yeah. Put them in soapy water and kill them, because I've mentioned this before in previous shows, is they overwinter's eggs, and each of those bags can have between 500 to 1,000 eggs. That's how they overwinter. So bring your family out and have a quality family afternoon that we call bagworm weekend hand-picking parties.
Good idea, but in the main, don't fog your evergreens with bagworm preventatives quite yet. Well, Raymond, we'll have you back soon. Thanks for coming over once again.
Always look forward to it, Eric.
He's horticultural entomologist Raymond Cloyd of K-State Research and Extension, a regular visitor to our weekly K-State Horticulture segment. That caps off our Thursday edition. We appreciate you being along with us and hope you'll rejoin us right here tomorrow, this same time. Until then, Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.